So we are welcome back to class, and this is the second lesson in module 4 of the product owner training. And in this lesson we'll be looking at the backlog, grooming the backlog. In the last lesson we focused on capacity planning and estimation, which is one of the things the product owner does. To plan the capacity of the team and also to have an understanding of how long delivery will take, and that is done via estimation. If you need to go over that class, feel free to do that. But just as I mentioned, in this class we'll be looking at the backlog and how we groom the backlog. This would be a short class. In actual sense, it has just one slide, but we'll take time to go over the details of that single slide. Let's go. So in module 1 and 2, I believe we made mention of the backlog, and one of the major things we said about the backlog is the deep criteria. The deep criteria. What does deep stand for? Deep stands for detail appropriately, estimated or estimate, emergent, and prioritize. That's what deep stands for. That is what deep stands for. And that is what we want to look at here. When we say, of course, we know what the product backlog is, and the backlog refinement is on the product backlog, whereby you refine the backlog, the details in the backlog, the task in the backlog. The main goal of the backlog refinement is to ensure clarity of work items that need to be completed. You want to ensure that when a developer picks a piece of story, such developer has the full understanding of what needs to do. So let's go into the details. The backlog refinement is not a Scrum event. It did not originate from Scrum, but it has been seen as an event of value or a meeting of value. That is why, if you remember, when we started this 3-5-3 of Scrum, on the 5 events, we also included the backlog refinement as the 6th, but it was clearly separated as not one of the 5. And again, it's an event of value that the team goes through. So it's not a Scrum event, but a good practice used to develop 1 to 3 sprints of ready product backlog item. So a smart team wants to prepare the product backlog earlier than when the sprint is ready. That is before they get to that sprint. And one of the ways they do that is from the product backlog to begin to sort out some stories for future sprints, and we create what we call sprint order. That's the sprint backlog. It's not the active sprint. That's why I made reference to it as the sprint order. So where we decide, let's say for instance, we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 here. Let's add a little more. 8, 9 items here. Right? Then we decide to move some of them. So this becomes 1. This becomes 2. This becomes 3. This becomes 4. And this becomes 5. While this becomes 6. On and on. 7, 8, 9. So what we're doing is preparing the stories or the work items in the product backlog and ensuring that such meet definition of ready before we actually get to that particular sprint. So let's see from here. Planning, so we say it's not a Scrum event. It's not a Scrum event, but a good practice used to develop 1 to 3 sprints of ready product backlog items which are pulled during sprint planning to create sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog, as I mentioned earlier, would serve as sprint backlog order, preparing for future sprints. Then on it we have clarify the content of the upcoming PBI. So that's just exactly what I've explained here to make the class quite short. Prioritizing, that takes us back again to the deep, where we want to ensure that the first one is to create, and while we are creating those stories, we are ensuring that they are detailed appropriately. All the information needed to complete that piece of story should be added to each piece of story. Then secondly, we want to make that story flexible, adaptive, that is that refining for future purpose. For future purpose, we want the story to be flexible so that we can come back to make adjustments as needed to that piece of story, right? Then we want to also estimate that story. For each story created, we want to have an understanding how long it will take to deliver that story, and of course we want to prioritize. Prioritization talks about which story comes first, which is more important than another. Obviously, from previous classes we know in building a house you would not start with making roof before laying the foundation. So that gives us the clear understanding. So I'll just go through this quickly. Clarify the context of upcoming product backlog items through conversation with the PO and anyone that may be of help. So of course that is to identify all the risk, the assumptions, the security challenges, and all the detail that is needed. So where you need other stakeholders to ensure clarity is needed, you to get that done. Then you estimate the effort. We've discussed about that. When you estimate, in the last class we looked at estimation. So the first time estimation happens with a team is during the backlog refinement, which is a process we would again carry out during the sprint planning meeting. Then of course we create functional specification, requires analysis, design, and testing skills from the team to help the product owner. All the skill sets needed, all the details needed should be added. Then one other thing I want to point out, requires 10% of capacity from the team. When you are doing your backlog refinement, you may consider to put aside a time for adequate planning by the team so that you can do a total proper work. Backlog refinement is one of the things we will be doing during the practicals. We would demonstrate that further. It's just a piece of class that we need to touch also so that we'll have good understanding on it. But the key focus of the backlog refinements as a guide, a good product owner would want to empower himself or herself with a deep criteria, ensuring that each of the story has all the information needed to deliver adequately. So that will be the end of this class. As I mentioned, it will be a short class. In the next class, we'll be looking at prioritization, which is another key component of the product owner role. So again, if you have any question on this, please note them down and reach out to me. I'll be glad to shed some light and give further clarifications on them. So we'll see again in the next class where we'll be looking at prioritization. Bye for now.